Hello and welcome to TSK F1. My name's Rich and this is your daily dose of F1 news. And it's race week. We've got Australia at the end of the week. But first of all, what's in today's news? We've got Stefano Dominicali talking about the end of F1 practice sessions potentially. Eddie Jordan accusing Max Verstappen of making up the driveshaft issue during the race in Saudi Arabia, and also Toto Wolff speaking on radical changes potentially coming to Mercedes. So let's get into it, guys. It's Monday morning. Please do make sure you're hitting that like on the stream and getting involved in the conversation, hitting that subscribe down below. But do get in the chat with your opinions, because we're going to be having some polls, and this first one really is about your opinion as well, because you are the fans and you get a say on this. Well, you don't get a say, you get to voice your opinion here. But here we go. Let's have the first story. It's Stefano Dominicali. Now, he's there's been a bit of a quote this weekend from Stefano Dominicali where he has said that he is a supporter of the cancellation of free practice sessions, which are of great use to the engineers, but the public doesn't like. So, I'm going to make a poll for this, because I want to know your opinion before I share my opinion. But, should F1 scrap practice sessions? Can't spell. It's Monday morning. Yes or no? Should F1 scrap practice sessions? Now, I want your opinion before I get into this properly. There's a vote now in the chat. Please do get your vote in. But he's basically saying that practice sessions are only useful for engineers, but we, the public, the fans, don't like practice sessions, and that they should get rid of them, is what he's talking about. Okay, why would you reduce them? That's what I would ask, because that's not something I'd thought of. So that's not me being controversial. There's two people in a row saying reduce them. What would you reduce them for? Well, no, why would you reduce them is what I would ask. So he said, I'm a supporter of the cancellation of free practice sessions, which are good use for the engineers, but the public doesn't like them. He proposed last year that points should be awarded during practice, and that unrestricted running doesn't have a purpose or contribute enough entertainment value. So that's where he's coming from with it, that it doesn't produce any entertainment value, and it's, for me, I have to say, I don't agree with it in the slightest, because all it will do is serve to make the gap more insurmountable to me. If you're reducing the amount of time a team potentially has to catch up, then they're not going to catch up. So it seems an ill thought out idea, honestly. Well, I mean, they're all fully utilised. If you watch them, they're all fully utilised. But I don't think it would. I think the idea, just to be clear with the other things that he's spoken about, I think getting rid of practice sessions is to have a sprint race, which I still don't understand sprint races. I don't see what they offer. Out of all of the sprint races, we've had probably two where we can go, that was great. The rest of them are just a qualification reset, where you have a fast, well, no, they all have been nearly, where you have the fast person coming through that may have messed up or taken an engine penalty or something, and it's a reset to get qualifying for the main Grand Prix where it sort of should have been. So for me, it doesn't make any sense. But I'm not a fan and never have been of the sprint races. I've never seen really the point of them as they are in the current thing, because all they do at the moment is either create a procession because not really anyone takes a chance on them, or they correct any idiosyncrasies that we got into it, rather than taking, say, a Lewis Hamilton at the back into the main Grand Prix, or a Max Verstappen at the back into the main Grand Prix. You just correct that in the sprint race, and then you've got a normal Grand Prix. So I think, for me, in my opinion, it's just something to, for me, it's something to pander to today's short attention span fan, potentially. Because really, how many people watch all 3 practice sessions? And if you were to say get rid of the 3 practice sessions and then have sprint races instead, but then you were to have the sprint race at a time during the day at 2 o'clock on a Friday, the vast majority of people are at work anyway. So this is the thing. This is the thing for me. It needs to be thought about properly, but I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a good idea. But I mean, look, I'm seeing in chat that other people have a different of opinion on it, which is fine. It's all about opinion. But I don't like sprint races. So I personally, I couldn't get on board with it for sprint races. And 95% of you are saying no, don't get rid of practice sessions. So there we are, though. That's what he has said. Now, the next story, this is likely to cause some chatter. This is an interesting one. Max Verstappen. Now, I've got quotes from both sides. Max Verstappen in the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix complained of something about the drive shaft, and saying something was wrong, right? And Eddie Jordan and David Coulthard have been speaking about this on another podcast, and now I was speaking about Eddie Jordan with someone else. I don't think it was on stream. But Eddie Jordan, for some reason, is passed off as some kind of idiot, but he really isn't. And a lot of the time, he has been correct. I'm just saying. He can say some really outlandish stuff, and he ends up being very right. But he says it that early, people think he's an idiot. Like, I remember he said Hamilton to Mercedes nearly an entire season before it happened. Like, he knew and he knows a lot of stuff. But this is an opinion. And this is what he had to say about Max Verstappen in Saudi Arabia. And I just read it and I thought, I've got to bring this to stream. So these are opinion. Then there's 2 opinions here. He says, I think that Max concocted something about a drive shaft so as to make himself look good. Because I'm absolutely convinced he was told before he went out, if Checo was leading the race and he's been on pole position, you have not got permission to pass him. And that's just my view. Because if I was running a team, that's exactly what I'd have said before they went out. You don't have to be Einstein to work it out. Max, in my opinion, found a decent excuse, which was the drive shaft. Christian Horner comes out and tells us, no matter what we did, we went back to base, we went and looked at all the data, and we looked at everything. We couldn't find everything. Guys, come on. There's enough in this to realise we don't want to be bullshitting. This is the situation where Max managed to position to hold his face while still taking second place. I mean, look, Eddie Jordan isn't one to mince his words, and Eddie Jordan has run a Formula One team. Whether you consider Jordan successful or not, he did it on a shoestring and he made it happen for a long time while dealing with a few very serious drivers in Formula One as well, right? But David, I'd love to know your opinion. I'd love to know your opinion, because David Coulthard disagreed and said, I think Max is so much heart on sleeve that he doesn't concoct anything. What you see is what you get. A little bit like when he was on the radio saying, what's the fastest lap? And they said, don't think about that. And he's like, well, I am. He remembers very well, he went into the final race of the World Championship in 2021 on equal points with Lewis Hamilton. And they were equal to a half point because of half points being awarded earlier in the year. So that 1 point fastest lap could make the difference later in the year, because clearly these cars are very close on the edge. So I hear you, EJ, and I know you've got your finger on the pulse of the team principals and those that control Formula One, but I think Max, when he says it, he means it. If he doesn't say it, it's because he doesn't think it. What do you guys think about that? Now, look, part of me I don't want to believe Eddie Jordan here, because again, it's an opinion. But Eddie Jordan is right far more than David Coulthard. Like, David Coulthard, he's there. He's there because he's XF1. But quite honestly, I've apart from when he's talking about driving and mentality, sort of a driver, he can be all right. But when it comes to rumours and stuff, David Coulthard has never been there. There is Eddie Jordan. Honestly, I can't praise him enough. He does come across as a bit daft and a bit wacky and a bit out there, but he really does know. He does know his people. Like, he really does a lot. And I just read it this morning and I thought, you know what? I don't find that a stretch. I don't find that a stretch at all. Like, okay, him going for the fastest lap and settling for second place are not exclusive. And I think two things can be true at once. You know, it can be true that he was told that if Checo manages to stay in the lead, you're not passing him. And two, it's true he went for the fastest lap because he's not passing Checo, but he's taking the fastest lap. You know, and maybe such an order is why him and Jos were so sour at the end, because maybe the reality was Max could have caught him. I don't know. To me, looking at the timings lap on lap, Perez was matching Max every time he set a fastest lap, apart from the last lap when he didn't have a chance to match it, obviously. But what do you think to that? What do you think to that, guys? Because it is an interesting conversation. Just because when Eddie Jordan's one of the few people that when he speaks, I sort of listen, just because of the amount of times I've said, Eddie Jordan, you're an idiot, in my head, like as if you're saying that. Like, people who have been around Formula One long enough. Think back to Lewis Hamilton going to Mercedes. Even when it happened, it seemed the stupidest thing ever. Eddie Jordan was banging that drum for a season. You know, it's crazy. Arctic says, in my opinion, he came up with it. He didn't have the race pace to beat Checo, but not because he wasn't allowed to pass. Gled says, probably got a point because he did fastest lap on the last lap, which means he had some pace left. It's not that much of a stretch to believe EJ on one lap pace, not race pace. Buzz says, does Max push for fastest lap at the end if he genuinely thinks there's something wrong with his car? Well, again, you raise a very good point. If Max Verstappen is honestly going along thinking this drive shaft's going to give up, right? There was someone in chat, I can't remember who it was. There was someone in chat, right? And I called it immediately, and I'm not being a know-it-all. It's just I've watched so many Formula One races, okay? But there was a period before the end of about 4 or 5 laps where Max's pace dropped off. Not off a cliff, but it dropped off because they were swapping fast laps, and then Max's pace dropped off. And they said, yeah, Max has got a problem. And I immediately didn't even need to think. And I said, no, he's slowing down, he's cooling the tyres, he's charging his hybrid, and he's going to go for the fastest lap. And about 2 laps later, we got the call about the fastest lap, and then he got it on the last lap. And that behaviour to me, look, if he's thinking long game and thinking about that extra point for the championship, surely a safe second place with all the points that second place brings is better for the championship than potentially twisting and breaking your drive shaft because you've stupidly gone for a fastest lap for 1 point. So if he's playing the long game with that, why isn't he with the other? Does that make sense? EJ is theatrical. That's the word I was trying to think of, Dan. I have a lot of respect for EJ after speaking to him in person last year. Great bloke. Yeah, he's a person. Actually, you know what? I could try. He is a person I would love to do a podcast, even if it was pre-recorded and edited and released for you guys. I would love to just to have an hour to talk to Eddie Jordan, because I think he is a vast, just ocean of Formula One knowledge and know-how. In fact, shall I attempt it? Shall I attempt to see if he's got a management company and see if he'd be open? Because you only have to ask, right? You only have to ask, and if it's a no, it's a no. I ain't got no money to give him. Nick says, feel there's more weight with what Jordan is saying, and Coulthard will protect Red Bull. That's actually a good point, Nick. I'd not thought of that angle with David Coulthard. You are quite right. He does do promotional stuff all the time still for him, doesn't he? He's often driving their sort of old F1 cars for promotional stuff. Very recently he did. Because I saw the helmet. He was doing a thing with Red Bull and one of their aeroplane chaps. And what's the worst that could happen? That just makes me think of a Dr. Pepper advert. I'm not going to lie. I don't know if they still do them. Maybe I'm a bit old. Oh, maybe I'm a bit old. But there we have it. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit because, again, Eddie Jordan, when he speaks, I listen. And even if I think that's just pure stupidity, Eddie, I still think he knows more than me. And this is really arrogant, but he's one of the few, because a lot of pundits are they just speak the obvious, don't they? So, third story of the day and final story of the day. Just a few quotes. I'm not sure where the quotes came from exactly, but they're on gpfans.com. And Toto Wolff has been speaking about the Mercedes, and it's just because I know we get a lot of Mercedes peeps in, and again, we get a lot of Red Bull peeps in, that's why I brought that to you, and some Ferrari, but they weren't out for Ferrari today. But he was asked if Mercedes is considering a complete chassis change for 2024, given the time and resources that could and would be put towards this. And Toto Wolff said, so when you speak about the chassis, the question is, do you speak about the monocoque and basically the tub, or are we speaking about everything around it? And are they getting a new float? Well, here we go. He says, I think the monocoque is one thing, and that's obviously there are weight implications, cog implications, so center of gravity implications. Where does the driver sit? More forward, more rearwards. But I think the biggest gains that we need to find is how we extract more downforce all around the track. These are the areas we are chasing now. And once you've come to the conclusion in the next few months that this was the right avenue, then things are going to continue that way. If we see that it's not enough to actually challenge at the front, then there might be more radical decisions that need to be taken. So, just for those of you that don't understand, the monocoque is the area that you might see sometimes that is basically the tub that the driver sits in, and it's got the side impact protection. It's got sort of half of the nose where the driver's legs and feet go, and it's got like you wouldn't include the halo, but the halo bolts to it, and the bit behind the driver, because then the engine bolts directly to the monocoque and everything. The gearbox comes off the engine, and then off the engine comes the rear suspension. But he's talking about the monocoque and where you sit the driver and things like that, because that's the core of the car. And what he's basically saying is the issue just aerodynamic? Because their stuff is telling them it's downforce all over the place, and the monocoque itself doesn't inherently affect downforce. Now, it kind of does, but let me explain. Aerodynamics, what you can do, for downforce, you can change the front wing, you can change the suspension, you can change the end fences, the floor, the side pods, the aero on the roll hoop, the engine cover, the rear diffuser, every rear wing, all of that without changing the monocoque. And what they're saying is, at Mercedes, they're just not producing enough downforce all around the track. So logic would dictate that you would try and add downforce aerodynamically around the car. And that is all to do with your surfaces rather than your monocoque. Whereas, if they do that and then issues are still persisting, then you really do have to look at the car, the core of the car, the centre of gravity. Now, if it's my understanding, if there's any engineers in chat, which I know that there are a few, you ideally want the centre of gravity to be as low and as central to the car's base as possible, because that reduces roll and pitch in the car. So you want basically all the weight to be as neutral as possible in the centre and at the bottom of the car. And I realise I'm not doing a great deal of justice on how I'm explaining that, but basically think of a double-decker bus. If your centre of gravity is higher up, so say instead of in line with the driver's bum, the centre of gravity is in line with the driver's head, you're going to get more roll. And think of a double-decker bus going around a corner and how they're top-heavy and do that. That's, in my head, a simple way to explain centre of gravity. I don't know if that works for people to understand. So what Toto is basically saying is you can move the driver within the monocoque, and you can also sort of position the engine and different components to try and move that centre of gravity to give you a balance. Because if you think about it, it's a difficult thing to get right, because you have to balance where the engine is. You have to, within the engine, you have to, if you remember, one of the reasons Mercedes was so dominant at the beginning of the hybrid area was because they came up with that split turbo. I'm sure it was Mercedes, wasn't it? So that they could position the turbo in between the V of the engine. And that's because it makes a really compact engine. Rather than having a turbo off to the side or something, you're creating this more compact area so you can control the centre of gravity more. And really, if you think about it in a Formula One car, you've got to balance where the driver is. You've got to balance where the fuel tank is, because how much fuel is it now? 110 kilos. So you think about that. That depletes to basically zero by the end of the race. So that's a lot. That in an F1 car, that is a lot of weight to manage the position of. Then you've got the engine. Then you've got the battery pack, and I should imagine the battery packs are laid on the floor. I bet they are just like, you've got the floor, and I bet there's something protecting it, but then I bet you've got the battery pack as low and as central as possible to maintain all that. But anyway, I'm really going in depth here. But have I just lost everyone with all that chat? Because I get a bit nerdy about stuff. But that's basically what Toto Wolff is saying, that they need to manage the aero and see if indeed their data and their feeling about everything is correct, in so much as the aero being the issue. And then if it's not that, now we're talking far more than side pods here. I feel like I should give you an image of what fuel is the interesting one for me, because that could be a huge changes of cargo across the race. This is what I was thinking, Dan, and I could be wrong on it, but I feel like the fuel tank positioning is dictated by regulation. So I think, because I believe it is literally right behind the driver. Obviously, you've got the airbox and everything above them, but I think you have the fuel right behind the driver. But I could be wrong on that. And then there's a gap, I think, that the engine bolts to the monocoque with. But I think it's height and everything like that. I feel like it's dictated by regulation. I could be wrong on that, but I feel like it is. But yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And as well as downforce, though, all of this stuff does point towards why you would have extra tyre wear and things if your centre of gravity is high, if it's off-centre, and things like that. You know, that could produce more wear than is necessary and wanted on your tyres. But by the way, I don't know where I read it. But I read this morning that Mercedes are bringing what they expect to be a gigantic upgrade to Imola, and I think that's what I said at the end of last week. I thought Imola would be the first one that they would do. Let me just bring up the F1 calendar. So we've got Australia this weekend, Azerbaijan, where I said maybe because it's the end of the month, Miami, and then Imola. So I think we'll get through the next 3 rounds, I think. But they won't be the only ones. But we'll have the Australian, Baku, and then Miami Grand Prix. And then you've got the Emilia-Romagna Imola Grand Prix on the 21st of May. And that is where Mercedes are targeting. Now, I think the problem you've got there as Mercedes fans is Imola. Is Imola enough time for upgrades off the back of Bahrain? Yeah. Off the back of Bahrain, that gives them March, April, May. It's basically 3 months. And that, to me, from what I've been told and what I know of Formula One, 3 months strikes me as about bang on the money with a push to conceive of, design, wind tunnel test, and then fabricate something like a front wing or a floor or a rear wing or more. About 3 months is what I understand the lead time to be, so long as you've got your data. So for me, yes, Imola makes sense. To push Miami, but there's a reason why Imola. And that's because they can send over that weekend, they can send extra parts as well. So if they're close on deadline, relatively speaking, Imola's down the road from the Mercedes headquarters. And I know it isn't, but it's closer than Azerbaijan, right? But then we're straight into Imola, Monaco, Spain as 3. Then 1 flyaway in Canada. Then you're back for Austria, Britain, Hungary, Belgium, Holland, Italy. So Imola strikes me as the right place to be doing it, because if they get, even if they're short on what they're taking there, they can bring more. Whereas you might see, I think you could see more upgrades in Spain, which is a few weeks after. So they could potentially huge upgrades for Mercedes, given that it'll be on correlation rather than theoretical data. Yeah, well, they're saying it seems right if you think about it. Okay, so what was it? Bahrain testing was the end of February, right at the end of February, I think. Right. Like I just said, apart from the time you spend in designing a wind tunnel, how long will it take to manufacture a part like a front wing? Okay, I can't tell you this exactly, Si, but what I can tell you, and I know people take the mick out of me for saying this, I genuinely went to the Alpine factory before Silverstone last season, and I was watching them fabricate floors, right? Because they had a new spec of floor, and they were doing 24 hours fabricating floors, and this was just making floors. Yeah, so the design was done, the molds were done. Absolutely, this was literally laying the carbon in the molds and then baking. What is it called? An autoclave? I could be wrong, but baking the carbon into its set. And Alpine said, like the guys on the floor, if you like, said 3 floors in a week was an extreme push 24 hours a day. So that was 3 floors. But that was, everything was already done. That was literally making them. And 3 was and I think front wings are very, very difficult as well, because what we don't see is they've got like hundreds of sensors built into the carbon weave and stuff. They're very, very technical. So it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, just for manufacture, like getting the carbon weave together and molding it and things like that. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if a front wing, if you were talking the best part of, I don't know, I want to say a week to manufacture a front wing for a person. I could be wrong. This is just based off things I know. And obviously there's not just one person, so you could probably get a few done in a week, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong, and I could try and ask and find you an exacting thing, but that was Alpine. 3 floors just to manufacture them. It was an extreme push for a week. But that was, I don't know if that helps, but there you go. You don't want to rush it. Well, this is okay. What I was going to say real quick before I end, Glad, is that if you think about it, think about this and the time frames I'm giving you, and you can figure whether it's right or not. Okay. Bahrain, end of February. Okay. And Toto Wolff said they wanted the data from Bahrain to correlate data that they had over the winter, right? Last week, so end of February, and then last week, which was, say the 20th of March, so 3 weeks. Let's say 3 weeks. It took them 3 weeks to take that data, design something, and make, is it a 60% model, and wind tunnel it. To be able to say they're finding huge gains in the wind tunnel, and that they found in 1 week what they found all winter in the wind tunnel. So it took them 3 weeks to design and 3D print a part to go into their wind tunnel to test it. So that shows you the lead time, and that, there you go. And you've really, if you think about it, that's the process. They're the quotes we've had. So 3 weeks from, oh, we've got a problem, to let's go this route, to we're finding big gains. So they actually, that's really good, isn't it? Because I've reported all of that news, so you've all had it, and it takes 3 weeks to get to that, and then obviously they're going to iterate that design. They're not going to get it bang on first time, so they'll probably have a period of refinement now, and then further testing, and then they'll go to full-scale fabrication, won't they? Which you've got another 2 months for, which makes sense. From what I've just said, in my opinion, if you gave them another 2-3 weeks for refinement of that design, then you've got, what, a month and a bit of fabrication to get them ready for both cars, pushing like hell. That makes sense for Imola, in my opinion. From what I've told you, I think that makes sense as well. It's like when someone was saying about Australia, I just didn't see them having the time frame to anything. I think anything you see from any team before Imola was already in the pipeline before the season started. Does that make sense? I feel quite strongly about that. Like if we get to Azerbaijan and Red Bull have got a big upgrade package, say, that was already being made before the beginning of the season, sort of thing. I would be very strong in that opinion. But there you go. I think we've had a good show this morning. I've enjoyed it, getting a bit technical and stuff about this. I I am going to be live over on Twitch very, very shortly on my other channel, Pit Lanes, with some iRacing. I'm going to be doing some Renault Clio racing, so please do come and join me. That's Pit Lanes over on Twitch. But I will be live here at 9 AM tomorrow morning with your latest F1 news. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. And if you are new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. And if you're not coming over to Twitch, have a great rest of your Monday. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.